This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, you're welcome to start the meeting.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. The Sexual Misconduct Committee meeting will come to order, please, with the following members present. Mr. Jackalone.
Here.
Mr. Ganagaka.
Present.
Ms. Montgomery.
Here.
Hi. And myself, Michael Schottenstein. May I please have a motion to approve the August 12th, 2020 Sexual Misconduct Committee meeting minutes, please?
So moved.
Your second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So, Kim, do you maybe want to start us off with the draft legislative changes for FY?
Sure. Taking our discussion from last time, I put together information on the issues we discussed. I think there was a big discussion, and as I went back through the recording and the minutes, I think we didn't reach agreement on many of the issues. I think it just brought up bigger issues that I think we're not. I didn't think I was tasked to go forward with that at this time, but I did do some research on the personal information systems confidentiality, and borrowed some of that language to add an enforcement mechanism to the statute. And you have the draft there. It would make a change to F5, and it would make a change to 473199. And it would indicate that knowingly accessing, using, or disclosing the confidential investigatory information would make that person guilty of a misdemeanor in the first degree. So first degree misdemeanor as the penalty. So I would, certainly welcome feedback on that. This is certainly, the first attempt at a, drafting an enforcement mechanism. So that's available for you in your information.
May I ask a question? So even though you spoke to it in the memo to some degree, I'd be glad if we could talk about the benefits of this enforcement mechanism. What do we hope to achieve by it?
So I think we talked about the fact that individuals who receive confidential information are receiving it with the idea that they have to keep it confidential as we do. And I think there was a discussion about what happens if they don't. And, and we did not have we do not currently have an enforcement mechanism. So I think that's where that conversation came from.
So in hindsight, then, if we had had this enforcement mechanism, would that have given us greater comfort in the past to release our Strauss file to Perkins Coie?
I don't necessarily think so. I think we operate with this statute, pretty frequently. I think it would be nice to have some clarity there, if people don't, but I don't think it would have changed, the legal analysis on that.
So if you'd be so kind, then what's an example of a time when it would change the legal analysis? Like you mentioned in the memo, disclosure to a post-mortem review committee, right? So this would be productive in that regard?
No, I think that's a separate issue. I don't know. I guess I'd like to get more information from our staff on this, but I don't know that having an enforcement mechanism changes your legal analysis of who you're going to give it to. I think that always stays the same.
I would suggest that it doesn't necessarily change the legal analysis, but it may change the risk analysis, right? And so it doesn't change the question of whether or not you can give the material. It changes the question of whether or not you should give the material, right? So when you have that enforcement hook, you're cushioning your risk a little bit by saying, okay, if we give this, at least we have a mechanism with which we can enforce something going forward, right? So it doesn't change that if you can or can't. It's more of the what's our protection if we do.
A lot of it is a pipeline question. You know, we give it to somebody who then unauthorized gives it to somebody else, like the press. So it gives you it's a pipeline. It's really not the beginning, it's the end of our, and I don't think it changes the legal analysis. As you know, we had some debate about that legal analysis, that many of us felt we were being much too conservative in that analysis, but that's not the issue. The issue is really what happens at the end of the pipeline, not generally at the beginning, although I suppose you could have beginning issues too. Most of it is a pipeline issue.
I mean, isn't it a deterrent? It's an additional deterrent. That's all. So, I mean, someone's going to look at that and think, well, am I contractually still liable, or is it something a little bit more? And that's going to be the deterrent factor. But I think you're right, Michael. It doesn't change the analysis with fair construity, but it could change the analysis, to Betty's point, with somebody else.
I could give you, sorry.
Sorry.
I could give you just quickly 2 practical ways that this plays out. So on our reports of on our ROIs, the investigative reports that go out, presently we have a footer on the ROI that gives basically a short summary of F5. What this would enable us to do would be also to put that enforcement language on the footer and tell people that disclosing this could subject them to some kind of penalty. Similarly, in cover letters that go out where we disclose this information, we will quote portions of F5. We would also be able to include that. It basically is going to put people on notice that you must follow the law, and there's a risk to not following the law. There's a penalty to not following the law.
So if you'd be so kind, Kim, actually, it's maybe a bit off the subject, but later today in Compliance Committee, we'll review OPHP and some of the things they've asked of us. And one of the things they've asked of us is additional information sharing from us, right? They would like to know more about the licensees that, we refer to them. And we've been hesitant about providing more information of substance, right? So if we have this additional language, does that give us more comfort in terms of sharing that additional information with OPHP?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And the question about what we share on the PHP is often going to be addressed by perhaps waivers. If a physician wants to take advantage of that, then many times you can ask them for a waiver so that you protect yourself at that end.
Okay, great, thank you. Kim, any other thoughts about the contents of the memo?
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is, we did talk about adding an exception for a postmortem committee. I think to your point, you could also talk about adding an exception for, the monitoring organization for one bite or, something like that. So we talked about doing that. But I think I think we'd be better served to address that in a discussion about the structure of the board that we're going to be having. And if we're making any statutory changes with respect to the structure, that we deal with it in that statute instead of dealing with it in the confidentiality statute. It feels a little bit like we have the cart before the horse. Like first we should figure out what it looks like and address all those issues in when we're dealing with that. And then if we need to put something in F5, we can, but we might be able to handle it without having to amend the confidentiality statute. So as we reflected on it further, we felt like that probably should be handled more in the discussions about board structure instead of kind of starting.
And then you might be able to, if you have a broad, as you address the board structure statutorily, if that's what we end up doing, some of the stuff you can tuck in under as a rule.
Right.
Although you'd have to have if you're going to do a good faith or a public safety or some kind of good cause exemption, then you can tuck this stuff under as a rule, under the good cause exception, and not. At any rate, there's a number of ways you can do that.
Right. So we thought we'd be better served to wait as we're having those discussions, and instead of proposing something now.
Do you need a motion from us, Kim, regarding this language?
My thought was if the committee is in favor of this language, that the first step would be to circulate it to interested parties. I think we can do it as part of all of the other sexual misconduct statutory changes that we're proposing, and get that feedback from interested parties.
Okay. Yes, Michael.
Kim, generally speaking, who would those interested parties be, generally speaking?
I think it would be, the associations that we presently deal with.
Okay. Does anybody have any concerns about the language that's been proposed? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of common sense and reasonable. So I think it would be fine to circulate if that's comfortable for you. Do we have a plan in terms of the other topics, the other F5 topics that we discussed, to bring them back in some form, or is that sort of an indefinite hold?
I guess I would be open to what the committee would like us to do with that. We may want to hold until after the retreat and get an idea of some additional direction.
I mean, I'll be honest, I had the same reaction you did, which is, when we walked away from that meeting after talking about those other F5 topics, I thought, man, this is actually, more complicated than I had thought. It seemed to keep opening up other areas of concern as we, proceeded. So I'm fine with waiting if everybody else is.
Yeah, I think the retreat's probably a good area, but we just need to build in time to be able to kind of vet that, though. I don't think it's going to get done in 15 minutes either.
I'm sorry, Bob. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I agree with that. The retreat's probably a good forum for that, but we better bake in some time for that, because 15 minutes to discuss this, I don't think it's going to get us resolution.
Yeah, I think my understanding is we'll have some more idea about kind of where we're going with some of the structure issues.
Yeah, I would imagine this will go well beyond the retreat. I think that, part of this F5 is we're talking about more board involvement, as we're talking about if there's any sort of, FSMB has recommended the quality assurance. We've been kicking around this idea of how can we do a more real-time review of what the board has taken action on. So I think all of those different things, it's sort of looking at it as a package of how can we best address some of what was raised in FSMB and still preserve our actions for our licensees, right? We still have to make sure that we're proceeding in a way that brings fairness and to our licensees process. So I think that's all part of that same sort of tinkering with F5 now. We may be making bigger decisions down the road about some review and how we're addressing some of those FS&B report concerns that would then impact F5 as well. So sort of why draft now when we could be really redrafting in just a few months, I think.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other comments on this topic? Tessie, I see something about duty to report and an update from you.
Hi, good morning. Yes, thank you. We've talked a lot about doing the educational 1 hour CME for our licensees about the duty to report. The project got a really good communication plan and then COVID happened. So it got paused a little bit. So I just wanted to update you. We've kind of resumed that plan and the video production is underway. So we had a pre-production meeting with the Department of Public Safety earlier this month. Public Safety has a wonderful video studio for recording things, sound booths, great editing equipment. They also have some professional videographers that work for that department. And because Public Safety was hosting the working group as well, I reached out to the communication folks and asked if we could possibly team up on the video production. That's going to be great for us. It's very much a cost savings move as well. If we were to outsource a production of a 1 hour video, that would be something very costly to our board. So working with Public Safety is going to be a great advantage. So we talked about things like, what the expectations were from us, what they need from us to start putting the video together. We outlined, what our needs were for recording the videos. We talked about things like having that interactive quiz at certain stop points throughout the video. We identified that's something that they do not have the correct editing software for. So I'm going to reach out to another state agency who I know does have that software and see if we're able to get them all of the pieces and parts if they can just assemble it for us. We outlined, kind of the logistics of hosting that video and that, it's not because of those interactive quizzes, it's not going to be something that we can just put on our YouTube channel or on our website like the rest of our videos because of that specific file format. So it was a great conversation. We talked about a lot of logistics of it. So now that that's kind of squared away, we have our first interview recorded. We talked to a subject matter expert. I believe he's been an expert witness for several, cases across the state and even nationally for sexual misconduct. So we did a 2 hour interview with him. And right now we are logging that interview. So going through identifying the sound bites that we want to use in the video. Once we get those sound bites, we kind of start doing our outline of the video, right? So we're going to build around his subject matter expertise. And then fill out the rest with information on, Ohio regulations. Another thing that we've been working on in the last month, now that we've returned to our normal production schedule, is I'm working with staff, enforcement and investigations, and also our assistant attorneys general on identifying possibly some other individuals who'd be willing to participate in our video. The medical board has seen a number of cases over the years. And sometimes those survivors are willing to share their stories to ensure that it doesn't happen again and it doesn't happen to others. And so we're working with our victim advocate to identify possibly individuals who'd be willing to participate. So that will be our next step, is obtaining those interviews, logging those, and then incorporating those into the video. I would really like to, send around drafts when we kind of have the script together before we start the actual production and editing of it, because it's much easier to change it when it's just on paper rather than when it's put together in the video. So that's something that, board members can look forward to in the next couple of months, is that draft script. So that is kind of the CME update. I know that there were other pieces of the communication plan that we've talked about as well. And again, because of the COVID emergency, those are kind of on hold too, as far as visiting different health systems and sharing this information with them in meetings. That's something that we have not pursued. If we continue to need to social distance, it's something that maybe we can look into doing virtually, or maybe something that we look forward to doing in person, maybe later in the spring. So those are my updates. Are there any questions or suggestions as we move forward with the production of this CME?
Right. Well, I think, first off, I think it would be really powerful to get a victim to provide testimony. If, we're able to do that. And secondly, we have videos right now, about sexual misconduct and things like that. Would we take clips, like pieces of video that we've already done that might be appropriate for this new video?
Yes, absolutely. So that was part of our discussion with public safety on the production. We let them know that, Jerga had already put together that sexual misconduct awareness video. And that's something that we would like to incorporate into this larger educational piece. So we talked about things, like matching styles of the video and the kind of resources that we had on that. So that is something that we will be incorporating into it.
And then when you indicated that because of the interactive quiz that we wouldn't be able to have this on our website or YouTube page, where will it be located? How will people access it?
So we can basically purchase a service, and it hosts specific types of files and complex types of video multimedia files. The Department of Health has something similar because they do a lot of educational videos. So it's called an FTP site. And on that, the site itself is not very pretty. It is really just a hosting site, but from that, the video can live there, and then we can link to it from any of our other outlets. So we can link to it from, the end of the e-license application. We can link to it from our website. It just can't live there as the source. Okay. So, yep, we've identified that as well. So I'll be talking about that more tomorrow with staff and making sure that we have the right resources there.
Thank you. Any other questions for Tessie? Okay. So any other sexual misconduct committee business today?
So I want to give you a quick readout on our historical case review. We have, as of yesterday, all cases have been assigned. So for the review process, we have now, those are all out the door. And we're at around that 90% completion rate. So we have made really great progress this summer, as well as internally, the review that's happening on the inside. Once those are coming back to us, those cases that, expert reviewers that keep closed, we're able to officially close the books on. One question that Mr. Giacalone has asked us prior is, what's our trend look like? And I keep saying, well, we don't have critical mass enough to really see what the trend looks like. I really do believe that October, we've just received another batch of the close. I think that will sort of equal us out a little bit from the earlier intake where we were getting some recommends for reopen. We're starting to see those trend numbers kind of what I would say normalize a little bit more. And so we should be able to provide some good data for you. Our next meeting, our October meeting, we'll have a good report out of where we're shaking out on what the reviewers are finding, and then what we're ultimately doing with those cases, obviously in a de-identified way. But some of those have gone for caution letters, some are just remaining closed, some of them are going for enforcement. And some are just taking a little more investigation. So what we've done is add to the rounds days with Dr. Safran and Dr. Rothermel. We've added an extra portion of rounds where we're handling those complaints, in aggregate. So that's been helpful, and we appreciate their extra time that they're putting into kind of helping us move 1,200 additional reviews along for the year. So I think we're making great progress. Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael,
Stephanie, may I ask you? You said you're at 90% completion on these are on the Strauss cases, correct?
That's correct. So we call them the historical review. So it's the 1,200 licensees from the past 25 years who had sexual misconduct complaints that had been closed.
Okay, and of the cases you said they've been referred, how many cases are you dealing with that you're looking at? We've got a failure to report versus an actual abuse, or we have to look more further at a possible abuse situation.
Right. So I would say I don't have the exact stats off the top of my head, but I would say that the failures to report are definitely fewer than us doing more investigation on any of the other cases. And what I would really say is that on some of those cases that are coming back, it's not necessarily more investigation that we're doing. It's maybe us just taking some action that we might not have previously taken. So there might be caution letters. There might be we might bring out a licensee in for an interoffice conference. We haven't gotten that far into the next steps to determine those cases. Obviously it's complicated by how old some of these cases are, right? So the age of the cases. We have encountered situations where victims are not willing to testify. We've been working with our victim advocate on that. So the path forward on these is obviously more complicated because of the age of the case. But I think that what I can say is that if there were anything alarming, we would have been moving very quickly on something that we noted or found.
Hi. So when we met last week and, Stuart was talking us through fix up things, he had indicated that, if I saw right, we're 96% of the way through the historical case review. And so when you talked about all of the sexual misconduct cases being assigned, you mean all of those 96% have been assigned and we still have just this bit to go?
So no, so 100% of the 1,200 licensees have been assigned.
Okay, that's what I want to understand.
We're waiting to hear back on those 4%. So the 4% are still out for review.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear Stephanie. You're saying 4% of the cases. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm sorry, Michael. I couldn't understand.
So 96% of our cases are completely reviewed by our external reviewers. They've come back to us. 4% are still out for review. But every case has been assigned at this point to an external reviewer.
Great. It's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah, and we've had some really good luck with our external reviewers and their ability to put time into it and give us good, thorough analysis. And we hit the jackpot with our reviewers.
Yeah, we should have our historical case review completely wrapped up and when I say wrapped up, I mean that additional 4%, everything should be done by the end of the month. Yes?
Correct. That's right. So when we report back in October, my expectation is that we will have 100% of the reviews turned back into us. And by that time, the internal team, one of the silver linings from COVID, our complaints were down a bit in those spring and early summer months because so many practices were closed. And so our investigators had a little more free time, and they were really able to tackle some of the internal review, looking at what the experts had opined. They were able to then take that and run with that and make, I think, pretty good progress in those earlier months. We have at this point, because we're coming in under the time that, or in under the dollar amount that we encumbered for the expert reviews, we have authorized a little bit of overtime in the meantime for that internal review to keep moving, because our goal is really to wrap up a great deal of this, excluding any enforcement activities, by the end of this calendar year. So we would really like to, whatever intermediate or close steps we can take, we want those to be pretty much finished by the end of this calendar year. So we can move forward and continue to work our protocols and continue to, kind of evolve in the present, and take some of this that we're learning and distill it and keep getting better.
So if you'd be so kind, and don't mean to put you on the spot, but mentioning protocols, what's the latest with our sexual misconduct protocol?
Yeah, good question. And Angie, you feel free to jump in if you want. But so July of 2019, a sexual misconduct protocol was created. I don't know if there was one prior to that. That might have been the first. Kim, you might know the answer to that.
I think that was the first. I mean, we certainly have always, had ways to investigate and deal with sexual misconduct cases, but I think that was the first time we pulled it out and made a separate protocol.
Yeah, so July of 19, the protocol was put into place, and that protocol included some steps, really, kind of throughout the investigation, but on the back end, where a committee would be reviewing the closure or the recommended closure of all cases, whether they were coming from enforcement review, standard review, or investigations, before they went to the secretary and supervising member. And so we've been working that committee for about a year. I think what we've made some determinations along the way, is that the steps that we're needing to take along the way in investigations and enforcement, we're sorting those out. We've had some good discussions about triage and what sort of triage notes need to be included, what sort of triage notes don't need to be included, how we're characterizing cases, right? So a lot of this matters on the front end when a complaint is coming in the door. And so we've learned as we've worked that protocol over the year. We're at the stage now where we're revising that protocol based on some of what we've learned over the year, and where we'll ultimately land. So Angie is working on a draft right now, and she's actually waiting on my feedback. So I was supposed to get that to her last night, and I didn't. I apologize, Angie. So Angie's working on a draft right now that we'll then share with the secretary and supervising member, and then all of you, of course. That has that close process on the end, actually running through. Now that we have Angie in place in her position, Angie will be the next stop before recommended close to the secretary and supervising member. So we'll be taking the committee out of it. We'll be doing a lot of training on the front end, of what Angie's expectations are when things come to her for a recommended close. So everybody's on the same page as to what those expectations look like. And then once they go through that review, then they'll go on to secretary and supervising member, for next steps. And obviously, if it's a recommended keep open or enforcement, that just goes right to secretary and supervising member.
Thank you. Any questions about any of that? Okay, Angie, you feel good about how this process is going?
Yes, I do. Yeah. It's not a lot of tweaking, really, truly. Really, the biggest change is replacing the committee with me. Mm-hmm. And I've said that I think the whole committee owes me lunch, but other than that, I think it's a good process. And then as far as just the protocol, as far as the investigation and stuff goes, we've just added a few ideas, a few more tools in the toolbox to doing these kinds of cases.
For what it's worth, I think it, that proposed change in how closures are assessed by substituting you for the committee makes sense. I think that sometimes a committee review can sort of instill a false sort of confidence where everybody can sort of look at each other and say, this is going okay, right? And everybody sort of looks to each other for, essentially comfort. But my thought is that, you doing it with your experience, it provides consistency and makes more sense to me in that regard.
Good, I appreciate it.
Sure, Bob.
Just one question. I think it's great you're here, Angie, but are we going to have to revamp this process if you ever leave? It's my next question, because it seems like it's person specific as opposed to process specific, right? I mean, if you leave, then we're back to square one. So my question is, if we consider that, or are we just going to put this in as kind of a stopgap in the interim and then deal with that later on, which is fine. I'm just kind of curious because it seems to focus a lot on Angie's expertise as opposed to the structure.
Great question, Bob. So one of my big things, and I beat this drum a lot, is that we design an organization around what the business needs, not around what a person brings or what a person has. I think we're sort of taking, it's a great opportunity that Angie's here, but our next task with this is really to build this into the position description itself, right? So this is an expectation of qualification, so that, and it might make it a little bit harder to find somebody who can fit this role. But I think when we're looking at this role for the future, these are the kind of things that we need to be expecting out of this level. If you're having oversight of enforcement and investigations, we need to be able to rely on that expertise to be able to evaluate those kind of complaints. And then I think, that just becomes and we'll probably learn more about what should be, part of that role as well.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. You just make it part of the job description, essentially, and that should address that.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, the way we at least drafted it, it is the deputy director of investigations, enforcement, and compliance, not Angie Canepa. But I completely understand what you're saying.
Great. Any other sexual misconduct committee business today? All right. Nice to see you all today. I guess if it's okay, maybe we'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. See y'all soon.